Good morning, everybody. John Stettin, Past the Wire, in the Past the Wire studio, war room, office, or whatever you want to call it, day after the Kentucky Derby. And it was quite a Kentucky Derby. As I've said for a while, the rules, the statistics, the guidelines that people go by don't mean anything. They all go by the wayside. And yesterday, we had a horse that has not raced as a 2-year-old win the Kentucky Derby. Justified, came through big, ran an unbelievable race. Went fast early, kept it up, drew away from the field. Heady ride by Mike Smith. Sort of the way we discussed in the webcast, we knew that he would show a lot of speed and be on the pace or right off it, and he surely was. And we discussed how Mike Smith is not afraid to let him run early when they've got that kind of speed. And when, a horse is cruising and has that ability to go fast early, it's not as much of a concern as when you're kind of hustling or chirping at a horse to make him go like that. This horse was within himself, came back clean as a whistle with no mud on him, and really showed he was the goods. No surprise, really. When we discussed the webinar, we liked 3 horses, all looking like they were going to peak, and that was Justify, Good Magic, and Mendelssohn. I landed on Mendelssohn and leaned on him more than the other 2, and he was essentially eliminated at the break. Magnum Moon made a left turn instead of the right turn that he made in the stretch of the Arkansas Derby. Instead, out of the gate, he bore in, creamed Mendelssohn, took him out of his game 100%. Ryan Moore tried to rush him up a little bit, but it was really an exercise in futility at that point. He was done, and I'm not surprised that he ran last because, those guys protect their horses and they've got a lot of other goals for the year. So, Moore just wrapped up on him, and he basically protected the horse and lived to fight another day. So he was virtually eliminated at the start. But the other 2 horses we discussed ran 1-2. And another thing that I discussed leading up to the Derby, and a lot of people didn't pay attention to and still don't, there's always value to be had at Churchill Downs on the first Saturday in May. If you like the favorite, Justify was the favorite. There were huge numbers around them. You could always make value, always create value. And if you say, well, I didn't bet him because I didn't want to take 3-1, well, whoever you bet, there was no value in that if you didn't bet Justify, because there's no value in a losing bet. I always say that, and that's not to discourage from swinging for the fences or going for a price. But if you land on a horse that's a favorite and he's 3-1, you got to learn to create value in him. And there's no better day to do that than on Derby Day, because the pools are huge. There's a lot of holiday money in there, and there's money to be made. So regardless of who you land on in those big races, whether it's the favorite or a big price, you got to go for what you have in front of you. Justify ran great. Again, no surprise. It was a great Derby. It's unfortunate Mendelssohn kind of got eliminated at the start, but I will throw this out there for those who follow. There's a horse that probably is as talented or potentially as talented as most of the horses in that race, and he's still a little bit under the radar. And when I watched the race live, I noticed it and said, commented that he had a really bad trip and could have run better. But I watched the replay this morning, and I encourage you to do the same. And you may have a horse to follow going forward, because I think he had the worst trip in the race, and that includes Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn had one incident in the beginning. He was virtually eliminated. He tried to recover, and he couldn't. This horse had a rough trip the entire way until about the last 1/8 of a mile, when he finally got to the far outside and finally got his legs under him. But if you watch Hofburg received a good ride from Irad Ortiz. It just didn't work out. He moved over to the rail, which was not a bad move yesterday, and he sat there and got pinched, checked, steadied, had to pull back, had to ease back, every time he tried to make a move, he got caught either in a blind switch or in a pocket, and again, had to check, steady, looking for room, loaded, turning for home, ready to unleash, tried to go out, couldn't get out, tried to go back in, couldn't stay there. Eventually just had to, run a little ways, not giving him his head when he wanted to. Once they straightened away, he tried to get out again, couldn't, tried to go back in, couldn't. Ultimately, like I said, the last 3/16 maybe, he got out to the far outside, didn't kick immediately, took him a few strides to get his legs under him, but then he did, finished full run, galloped out well, and is a horse to watch going forward. He'll probably, in my guesstimation, pass the Preakness in 2 weeks. That's almost a certainty. Probably point for the Belmont. I wouldn't mind seeing him actually point for the Travers instead. A lot of times, and a horse named Strode's Creek, and there's so many come to mind, these horses that are flying in the Derby, take off the Preakness, and everybody bets them back in the Belmont, and they come up short. Hofburg kind of fits that profile, but you know how I feel about those rules. Those rules are made to be broken, especially in these big races. So that said, I think Hofburg would be very dangerous in the Belmont, taking that, the 2 weeks of the Preakness off, coming back in 5 weeks, and Justify going for the Triple Crown. Hofburg will be the buzz horse by then, because everything I'm saying today, people will see at that point. Nobody's really talking about it yet, but I do believe he had the worst trip, and I think he's possibly that rule breaker for the Belmont, because it was odd for Mott to run him in a Grade 1 stake, the Florida Derby, right off his maiden. It was odd to go to the Kentucky Derby with such a lightly raced horse, but I think he proved he belonged, even with a under the radar, off the board kind of trip. And I'll be looking for him, come Belmont Day as a major contender if he trains well and all things go according to plan. That said, we saw a great race yesterday. We saw, a great champion. We saw Apollo go down. We'll probably see Justify back in 2 weeks at Pimlico. He looked great this morning. Didn't surprise anybody, but certainly delivered. And in closing, I will say this. I'm a big fan of the glory days of racing, years back in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up around the track. It was, phenomenal. But when you think about it, we've really had a lot of great horses the past 5, 6, 7, 8 years, 10 years, or whatever, and even recently. I mean, there are just so many that come to mind. I mean, American Pharaoh won the Triple Crown. We've had the Zenyatta, Rachel Alexandra, Beholder, Shared Belief. I mean, this list goes on and on. I don't want to forget or slight anybody. I didn't make a list. I'm just going off the top of my head. But we've just had so many runners in the past couple of years, and it's exciting for the game. Great to watch these animals compete. And, and Mike Smith, what could you say? 52 years old, rides like a young guy, great shape, inspiration to anybody in the 50-ish, 60-ish age bracket that's trying to get back in shape. But the last thing I will say is, the guy who owned California Chrome, I don't even remember his name, made that ridiculous comment, we'll never see another Triple Crown winner in my lifetime. Well, we saw American Pharaoh, and, going back to those, quote, glory days in racing, they did used to come in streaks, and everybody back then used to say, oh, they got to make it tougher. Then it went through that long drought, which it also has historically and cyclically done. And they said, oh, it's too hard. We got to make it easier. It's fine the way it is. It's supposed to be tough. Great and special horses that get the trips and get the breaks and are brought along, expertly get it done. And they do come in streaks, so you never know. They kind of come in clusters. So exciting times in the sport of kings. Hope everybody enjoyed the Derby. Hope you were lucky enough to make some money. We had a few really nice winners on our webcast, and I hope some of you capitalized. I hope you didn't play the Derby the way I did, leaning more heavily, much more heavily on Mendelssohn than the other two I like. But in the final analysis, we called how the race would run pretty accurately, despite the weather conditions, and we did say there were 3 horses potentially coming to a peak. Justify, Good Magic, and Mendelssohn, and 2 of the 3 ran 1-2. So hopefully some of you out there put it together right and made some money. We'll be back with more webcasts in the future. Hope everybody had a great derby. We'll be back at them today at Belmont. There's a couple of spots that I like, one in particular. And have a great day, everybody, and enjoy.